Alexandra Dean. Ella presenta un documental el lunes que se llama, Juan Pablo, Los secretos de Playboy. De Playboy siempre dijimos, es un señor que recibe en pijama, con una bata de satín, con una cachucha de marinero, con una pipa y con una Coca-Cola en la mano, ¿no? Botella chiquita. Y el tipo siempre está rodeado de las mujeres más bellas del mundo. Pues resulta que Alexandra Dean, dice la publicidad, se atreve a contar los secretos no contados de Playboy. Ella ya tuvo la experiencia de la vida de Paris Hilton hace un par de años. El documental se llamó This is Paris. ¿Qué es lo que hay que todavía no sabemos de Playboy? Alexandra no es una frustrada Playboy que la botaron de la mansión, no. Alexandra es una periodista, ganadora del Emmy, ha producido para revistas, para PBS, para Bloomberg, y tiene una gran experiencia con Business Week. Fundó su propia empresa y muy gentilmente nos atiende ahora. Ana, los que creíamos saberlo todo del señor Hefner y de los secretos de Playboy y de su hija y de la quiebra y de las mujeres y de la cama redonda y de Kimberly, y que leíamos todo, creíamos saberlo todo. ¿Qué nos va a mostrar el documental nuevo? Algo que no sabíamos.
Alexandra, for those of us who believe they know everything about Playboy, about the round bed, about the daughter, about Hugh, about the Playboy bunnies, about, everything that happened in the mansion and outside, what can this documentary tell us? What is the new, what's the secret that's going to expel, at least a little bit that we don't know about?
Well, this is the first time I think we'll be hearing the history of Playboy from the perspective of the women on the cover, in the magazine, in the bunny costume, the girlfriend in the mansion. We've never really heard their version of events in their own words. And there were many, many, many different experiences that the women had. But some of them told a story of a Playboy I'd never heard about. And it was a completely different Playboy with a lot of dark secrets that we really spend 10 hours digging into. And I think the heart of it is a lot darker and, more serious than I think anything we had ever suspected before.
Es la primera vez que se va a escuchar la historia de Playboy desde la perspectiva de las mujeres, de las conejitas de la mansión. Nunca se escuchó de su voz la experiencia que vivieron y hay muchas cosas por las que ellas atravesaron que pues no se habían contado antes, y ellas ahora en este documental cuentan esos secretos oscuros. Duraron 10 horas explorando esos eventos que son más serios de lo que habíamos escuchado.
Alexandra, precisamente sobre una de ellas, la conejita Holly Madison, ella asegura que vivir en la mansión Playboy era como vivir en un culto. ¿Por qué?
Speaking specifically about Holly Madison, she said that living in the Playboy mansion was like living in a cult. Can you explain to us why she assures this?
Yeah, one of the things that was really surprising to me as I did my research into this was that over the years, many women called the Playboy Mansion a cult. And it's not a cult that you and I would recognize, with kind of people with shaved heads, walking around and maybe, murmuring sayings. It's not like that. But what they're saying is that Hefner controlled everything within the mansion. He controlled everybody's movements, the schedules, what people ate. He controlled the women's weight, how they looked. And over time, he made it feel like the most important thing in the world was for the women to appease him, make him happy. And so they were constantly competing with each other to survive there. And that meant that they were constantly in this kind of mind control atmosphere.
Una de las cosas que le sorprendió haciendo la investigación es que muchas de ellas llamaban a la mansión Playboy como un culto, y no es un culto como el que nosotros tenemos en la mente, sino porque Hefner controlaba todo en la mansión, los movimientos, los calendarios, la comida, el peso que ellas debían tener, cómo se veían, y las hacía sentir que lo más importante en la mansión era hacerlo a él feliz y complacerlo. Entonces empezaron a competir entre ellas para sobrevivir, y pues por eso ese control que él tenía dentro de la mansión las hacía sentir en un culto.
Yo quisiera preguntarle a Ana si en la mansión o en el mundo secreto de Playboy pasó algo fuera de la ley, algo que se pudiera considerar ilegal.
Based on everything that you learned and studied about Playboy and Playboy Mansion, did anything happen inside the Playboy Mansion that could be considered illegal?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, Playboy was like, Las Vegas, in that everybody kind of accepted that wild things happened there, and we just said what happened at Playboy stayed in Playboy. And now we're looking at it more closely and saying, why did Playboy get a pass, We know that the drug use was rampant. We get into that in the series, and it was much more extreme, and it had big consequences that we never looked at. We know that there were definitely a lot of sexual acts that went on that were not consensual. And there are now women that want to speak up about that. And, I think ultimately the way that people were treated there was the kind of violence and abuse that sometimes happened also would not be legal today, would not be accepted today.
Definitivamente, Playboy era como decir Las Vegas, todo lo que pasaba ahí se quedaba ahí, y ahora se preguntan por qué se quedó ahí, por qué se dejó pasar. El uso de drogas, por ejemplo, era bastante extremo, llegó a tener consecuencias bastante serias. Sabían, o se sabe ahora, de actos sexuales no consensuales, no consentidos, y las mujeres ahora quieren hablar de eso. La manera como eran tratadas las personas con violencia, con abusos, tampoco son legales o mejor aceptados actualmente.
Ana, hoy hablamos de los realities como la revolución de la televisión. Realities de todo tipo, y es lo que está viendo el mundo. Realities de deportes extremos, de cocina, de convivencia, de baile, de música, de máscaras. Yo pienso que quien se inventó los realities fue el señor Hefner en su mansión hace 50 años. ¿Ella está de acuerdo?
Nowadays, we speak about realities TV as the revolution of TV. We see realities about extreme sports, cook, dancing, love affairs. And to an extent, the director of our show believes that Mr. Hugh Hefner was the person that, invented reality TV shows 50 years ago. Would you agree?
Yeah, it's a funny thing with Girls Next Door. Hugh Hefner was one of the great pioneers of reality television. And actually, he was a pioneer of a lot of things. He really was. He pioneered the nudie magazine as we know it. He was before Penthouse, before Hustler. Playboy was the one, and he also pioneered in many ways the way that we feel about people having sex outside marriage. We kind of, Americans accepted that with the help of Hugh Hefner. Hefner really argued that the girl next door is cheeky and fun and likes to have, a tumble in the hay as much as the next person. And so he was always on the cutting edge of the zeitgeist that way. And he was also very progressive. So often what he did was, seem very forward-thinking, very visionary. He had people of color on his television show when nobody else would do that, and it made him a real progressive icon. He promoted women in his companies. He seemed to be always forward-thinking. And one of the things we really dig into in the documentary series is how that progressive sheen and all of that forward-thinking aspect of him often hid some of his darker nature. Because really, that was one side of Hugh Hefner, but the other side was a side most people didn't see, only the women in the inner circle in his bedroom.
Sí, nos dice que es chistoso que el programa que él tenía, Las chicas de al lado, fue un programa pionero en los realities y él también fue un pionero en muchas cosas, como la desnudez en la revista, como lo sabemos, y la manera como nos sentimos ahora mismo con las personas que tienen sexo fuera del matrimonio. Eso fue con ayuda de él, y también Las chicas de al lado nos hizo ver a estas mujeres de una manera distinta. Así que sí era un visionario, una persona que puso personas de color incluso en la televisión cuando nadie lo hacía, y eso lo convirtió en un ícono porque además promovió a las mujeres en la televisión, y ese pensamiento estaba adelante de su momento, de su tiempo, y eso ellos llegaron a analizar qué fue lo que sacó esa naturaleza oscura que él tenía, un lado que casi nadie vio, pero sí esas chicas con las que vivía y tenía intimidad.
Pero ¿cree él que si Hugh Hefner todavía estuviese vivo, tendría todavía a estas mujeres que hoy en día lo acusan, pero estarían a su lado todavía? Do you believe that if Hugh Hefner was alive still today, he would still have some of these women that are now accused to him next to him?
I don't think so. I mean, firstly, he'd be like 107 or something. So I hope he wouldn't have the 16 women. But no, I think the world has changed, right? We've had a big shift with the Me Too movement and Time's Up. And then, you know, I think a lot of people wondered at that time, would Hugh Hefner's life have changed? Would he have been treated like Weinstein or Epstein? And I think the answer is not quite. You know, Hugh Hefner was this progressive icon. His story is more complicated. He did good as well as bad. And so I think really this is the moment of reckoning for him, because we're now ready to talk about the more complex, difficult stories where it's not just a simple case of Me Too. It's women who were signing up, you know, to be at the mansion, to be part of this sexual revolution that he was spearheading, but then the lines of consent were blurred and broken.
Nos dice que, bueno, que no cree, estuviera muy viejo en este momento, pero el mundo ha cambiado, sobre todo con ese movimiento Me Too, pero esto es mucho más que ese movimiento Me Too que hemos visto, porque esas mujeres aceptaban, digamos, entrar a esa casa, entrar a esa mansión, querían hacer parte de esa revolución sexual, pero esa línea de consentimiento era un poco borrosa. Entonces nos dice que Hugh Hefner sí era un ícono, un progresista, hizo bien y mal, y ahora estamos listos para hablar de lo más complejo que él tenía.
Ella cree que la mansión Playboy era un lugar de prostitución a cielo abierto, o no tan disimulado, mejor dicho.
Do you believe that the Playboy Mansion was like a prostitution site?
You know, it's interesting. It's not that simple. It really isn't. That's really part of it. You know, I think I assumed that maybe it was that simple for some of the women at the mansion. But what I found was that many of the women didn't really understand what they were signing up for when they went to the mansion, and they really thought that they were, you know, a real girlfriend of Hugh Hefner. And they didn't think that they were signing up to be paid for sexual favors. I think for other women it was different, and over time there were women who kind of accepted it as that money for sexual favors or sexual, fidelity kind of situation. But I think for a huge amount of the women over all those decades, it wasn't that at all. And that's part of what makes this so fascinating and sad, is that they really fell for Hefner's promises and his charisma and his vision of this kind of free, open sexual Xanadu where everybody could be kind of like part of his family and they could have this joyous free sex. And I don't think that they really thought that they were becoming prostitutes.
Es complicado, Félix. Dice que no lo describiría así de una forma tan sencilla porque algunas mujeres no pensaron que eso era lo que estaban haciendo, que se estaban prostituyendo, porque muchas de ellas pensaban que realmente eran las novias de Hugh Hefner, no creían que simplemente estaban teniendo sexo por dinero, otras sí aceptaban que estaban haciendo favores sexuales. Entonces nos dice que para muchas de ellas no era simplemente un sitio de prostitución. Por eso la historia es tan fascinante, porque muchas cayeron en el carisma, en las promesas, en la visión que Hugh Hefner tenía, en la visión que tenía también de la sexualidad, de esa sexualidad abierta que se podía vivir dentro de la mansión Playboy y pues hacerlos creer que todos podían ser parte de esa familia con sexo libre. No creían que era prostitución.
Hablemos de la noche del cerdo, de Pig Night. ¿De qué se trataba este ritual semanal dentro de la mansión Playboy?
Can you explain to us what was Pig Night about?
You know, Pig Night is really fascinating because Hefner named it Pig Night. And the butlers and the people in the mansion weren't allowed to say the words Pig Night, but he and his friends were allowed to call it Pig Night. And what it meant was it was the women that they didn't rank very highly in their I'm so sorry. What it meant was that it was the women they didn't rank very highly in their pyramid. They had a pyramid where they ranked women by numbers. And the women on the front cover of Playboy that month, you know, that was a 10. But the women who were like below a 5 or a 6, or the women who were paid for sex, the prostitutes they would pick up on the strip, on the Hollywood strip, they were considered pigs in Hefner's mind. And they would bring all of these women to the mansion on Pig Night, which was Thursday nights. They would clear out all the playmates and the women they considered 7, 8, 9, 10. And the pigs, or the women they called pigs, they could treat any way they wanted. It was a free-for-all for everybody. And, some of them were prostitutes, some of them weren't. The women who were prostitutes, the doctor would check in the bathroom and then sort of let the men have their way. But the women who did witness it, and the butlers who witnessed it from the sidelines, say it was really, really out of control, because it's where a lot of the experimentation happened. And there's a lot of things that we couldn't even include in the documentary that happened in Pig Night. It was really, really wild.
Bueno, nos dice que es fascinante esa noche del cerdo, como le llamaban ahí, porque pues nos decía que así lo podían llamar Hefner y sus amigos, pero no las personas que trabajaban con ellos en la mansión. Y pues básicamente es que tenían un ranking, clasificaban a las mujeres del 1 al 10. Entonces digamos que la 10 era la que salía en la portada, esas conejitas Playboy, y las 5 o las 6 eran las prostitutas, esas que recogían del Hollywood Strip y las llamaban cerdos. Hacían un evento los jueves en la noche, sacaban a las conejitas, a las que le calificaban por encima de 7, y pues llegaban los cerdos y tenían esa noche en las que las trataban como quisieran, algunas de ellas prostitutas, otras no, y pues las que presenciaron eso y no eran prostitutas, y también los que trabajaban ahí en la mansión, decían que era algo absolutamente fuera de control, porque ellos experimentaban esa noche con absolutamente todo. Nos dice que hay cosas tan fuertes que incluso no las pudieron poner en el documental.
La última pregunta tiene que ver con el señor Hefner, quien mantenía relaciones con su esposa de turno, pero también se dice que con varias de las visitantes a la mansión, y que inclusive llegó a mantener una relación abierta con 2 o 3 mujeres, o con 2 hermanas, o bueno, en fin. La leyenda habla de mujeres que parecían que venían de fuera de la tierra, mujeres imposibles de creer que existieran. ¿Era el señor Hefner una máquina de sexo como para atender a todas esas mujeres, o eso estaba más bien en la leyenda urbana?
This is a question about Hugh Hefner. The legend says that, he had, a wife most of the time, but he also had sexual relationships with many women that came in as visitors. He had sisters in which he had a relationship with both of them, and so on and on. In your opinion, and based on what you have learned about his life, do you believe he was truly a sex machine like the legend has, described him or made him to be? Or is this part of the legend and a myth itself?
A lot of the women talk about this because Hefner had this, as you say, larger-than-life reputation for being a playboy and having so many women that he wanted to have sex with all the time. And what's interesting is they all say, it's kind of true. There were always women around. His appetite was endless. And it wasn't just women, it was men as well. But it also, it was true that he didn't always have sex himself. A lot of the time, he just watched, and he liked to think of himself as a movie director, and he would direct the people on the bed, and he had a little camera, and he would film them. And he was, as part of his obsession with control over people, he liked to control them having sex, and he liked to control how many people were in the orgy pile, and he really, really liked to watch.
Well, Alexandra, thank you so much for your time in W Radio. It's been a pleasure talking to you today about this documentary, and good luck with it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bye bye. Muchas de las mujeres hablan precisamente de eso porque Hefner tenía esa reputación de tener muchas mujeres, de ser ese hombre que tenía sexo todo el tiempo. Y es verdad, había mujeres e incluso hombres también con los que él tenía sexo a su elección, pero no siempre él era el que tenía sexo. A veces simplemente le gustaba mirarse, era una especie de director de una película que le gustaba dirigir y filmar también lo que hacían los otros. Tenía esa obsesión por controlar a las personas, controlarlas a ellas teniendo sexo, y le gustaba eso también.
Muchas gracias al director de Playboy.